Ready to level up your mind? We're the Bookworm Duo, and we're here to make reading fun again. Join us for insightful book summaries, witty banter, and a whole lot of learning. Let's dive in. Today, we're all about better conversations, diving deep into Supercommunicators by Charles Duhigg.
Oh, yeah,
Have you heard of him?
yeah, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who seems to unlock the secrets of, well, everything.
Right. This time he tackles communication. He spent years researching this, interviewing everyone from FBI agents to couples therapists.
I know, right?
I mean, who hasn't wished they could read minds during a tricky conversation?
Maybe Duhigg's got the next best thing.
Yeah, and that's what makes the book so engaging. He doesn't just talk theory. He brings it to life with these fascinating stories. Like, did you know a CIA recruiter used vulnerability to win over a hesitant source?
Really?
Or that a juror flipped a case using specific communication techniques? Okay, before we get lost in the stories, let's set the stage. Duhigg breaks all conversations down into three main types.
Okay.
What are they?
There's, what's this really about? Those practical, decision-focused conversations we have all the time. Think choosing where to eat or planning a project.
Right.
Then there's how do we feel, where emotions and vulnerabilities take center stage.
Okay.
This is where we connect on a deeper level.
Right.
And lastly, there's who are we? Conversations that explore our social identities, how we see ourselves, and how others see us.
Oh, that's an interesting framework. It seems like recognizing which type of conversation is happening is key to connecting with the other person.
Absolutely. It's like tuning into the right frequency. Imagine trying to have a heart-to-heart with someone who's laser-focused on logistics.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to get static.
So in a what's this really about conversation, what are some strategies for success?
Well, Duhigg highlights this quiet negotiation that happens even in seemingly simple conversations. We subtly signal our preferences, aiming for an agreement that works. He uses the example of a jury deliberation to illustrate this, where a juror named Bully skillfully uses questions and stories to sway his fellow jurors.
Hold on, was he being manipulative?
Not necessarily. It was more about tapping into shared experiences and values,
Okay.
shifting the conversation from cold logic to a more nuanced understanding of the case. Remember, good communication is about understanding the other person's perspective, not just pushing your own agenda.
So it's about recognizing those unspoken needs and motivations, and then finding ways to connect on a deeper level.
Exactly. Think about it this way. You're trying to decide where to eat. Maybe one person is craving comfort food after a long day, while the other is focused on healthy choices. If you just argue about restaurants, you miss the underlying needs driving those preferences.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So how do we actually figure out what people want beyond what they're saying?
Duhigg says supercommunicators are like detectives, picking up on both verbal and nonverbal cues. They notice body language, tone of voice, even attempts to change the subject.
It sounds like it takes real effort to become attuned to those subtle signals, but I guess the payoff is worth it if it leads to more fulfilling conversations.
Absolutely. And it's not just about reading minds, it's about creating space for the other person to feel heard and understood.
This reminds me of the doctor, Duhigg profiles, who specializes in prostate cancer treatment. He was frustrated because patients kept opting for risky surgeries, even when he presented clear data supporting a less invasive approach.
Yeah, I remember that.
What do you think?
Right, he was initially focused on logic and statistics while his patients were grappling with fear, family concerns, and potential side effects. He was in a what's this really about mindset, but they were craving a how do we feel dialogue.
That's a perfect example of why recognizing the type of conversation is so crucial. We need to be on the same wavelength emotionally as well as intellectually. But shifting gears a bit, how do we navigate those? How do we feel conversations? They seem so much more vulnerable.
They can be, but they're also incredibly powerful for building connection. Duhigg talks about the CIA recruiter struggling to connect with a potential source. It wasn't until he opened up about his own vulnerabilities that a breakthrough happened.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So showing your own human side can actually be a strategic advantage in certain situations.
It can. It builds trust and encourages reciprocity. If you share something personal, the other person is more likely to feel comfortable doing the same. It's like that study where asking strangers intensely personal questions actually accelerated intimacy.
Wait, what? Are you saying vulnerability is the new small talk?
Not quite.
Okay.
But the point is, revealing something about yourself can create a deeper connection much faster than just sticking to superficial topics.
So even if I'm not naturally the touchy-feely type, I can still foster those emotional conversations by asking the right questions. the kind that draw out values, beliefs, and experiences.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of nonverbal cues in these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Tone of voice, body language, even laughter can send powerful signals about your emotional state and desire to connect.
So it's not just about the words themselves, it's about the whole package.
Yeah.
And this applies not just to personal relationships, but also to work, negotiations, even resolving conflicts.
Absolutely. Duhigg dedicates a whole chapter to making hard conversations easier. Using a dialogue about gun control as an example, he shows how focusing on personal stories and emotions can be more effective than simply arguing facts and figures.
Okay, that makes sense. People often dig in their heels when they feel like their views aren't being respected.
Yeah.
But how do you keep those conversations from spiraling out of control?
Duhigg suggests acknowledging discomfort up front,
Okay.
focusing on creating a sense of belonging,
Okay.
and setting clear guidelines for the conversation.
He also talks about controlling our own impulse to control others.
Mm.
It's a subtle point, but when we try to dictate how others should think or feel, it often backfires.
That's such a great point. It's about creating a space for open and honest dialogue, even when it's uncomfortable, and recognizing that everyone has a right to their own perspective. It sounds like we've only just scratched the surface of what's this really about and how do we feel conversations.
We have. And don't forget that third type, who are we?
Right.
These conversations can get pretty complex, so we'll delve into those in the next part.
All right, listeners, stay tuned for part 2, where we unpack the fascinating world of social identities and how they impact our communication.
Welcome back to our deep dive into supercommunicators.
Yes.
Last time we explored the nuances of what's this really about and how do we feel conversations.
Right.
Now let's tackle that third type, who are we? Right, those conversations that delve into social identities, which can be a bit of a minefield. So what are some practical strategies for navigating these conversations, especially when they involve sensitive topics?
Well, Duhigg emphasizes creating a safe space for dialogue, acknowledging that discomfort is natural when discussing these topics. It's about focusing on creating a sense of belonging rather than shutting down conversation.
That makes sense. It's like setting ground rules, right?
Yeah.
Making sure everyone feels comfortable sharing their perspective without fear of judgment.
Precisely. Duhigg suggests establishing clear guidelines for the conversation, ensuring that everyone feels heard and respected.
Okay.
He uses a surprising example to illustrate this. Netflix.
Netflix. What does binge watching have to do with difficult conversations?
It's not about the shows themselves, but about their corporate culture.
Okay.
Netflix faced a controversy when their head of communications used a racial slur during a meeting about offensive content.
Oh, wow. That's a bit ironic, isn't it? Discussing offensive language while using offensive language.
It certainly created tension within the company.
Yeah.
Some employees felt the context justified the word, while others were deeply offended. This led to a lot of soul-searching at Netflix about how to create a truly inclusive environment.
So how do they handle it? Do they just sweep it under the rug?
Not at all. They brought in a diversity and inclusion expert, Verna Myers, who implemented workshops and training sessions focused on open dialogue about identity and bias.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What did these workshops entail? Were they just lectures about being politically correct?
It was much deeper than that. Myers encouraged employees to reflect on their own experiences with privilege and exclusion. She also prompted them to share stories about times they felt marginalized or unintentionally excluded others.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds like it could have been really intense.
It was, but also incredibly powerful. By creating a space for vulnerability and acknowledging biases, they built empathy and understanding across differences.
It sounds like they moved beyond abstract concepts of diversity and inclusion to really grappling with the lived experiences of those who have been marginalized.
Exactly. And it highlights that these conversations can be uncomfortable, but that discomfort is often necessary for growth and progress. It's like a muscle we need to exercise.
That makes sense. Duhigg also talks about identity threat, the idea that when we feel like our social identity is being questioned or attacked, we get defensive. How do we avoid triggering that?
It's a tough one because it can happen even when someone has good intentions. Imagine trying to support a friend from a marginalized group but saying something that minimizes their experience. It can actually create more distance.
So it's not just about what we say, but how we say it and how it might be received by the other person given their unique experiences. It seems like walking on eggshells.
It can feel that way, but Duhigg offers some strategies. He suggests acknowledging discomfort up front,
Okay.
focusing on creating belonging and being mindful of power dynamics.
Oh,
He also emphasizes a technique called looping for understanding.
looping. Is that like repeating yourself until someone gets it?
Not quite. It's more about active listening and demonstrating that you're trying to understand the other person's perspective.
Right.
You repeat back what you've heard in your own words and ask, did I get that right?
It's like a verbal confirmation that you're on the same page.
Yes. And it shows you're not just waiting for your turn to speak, but genuinely invested in understanding their viewpoint. Duhigg highlights how a juror used this technique to great effect during a difficult deliberation.
Wow, I can see how that would be powerful.
Mm,
It seems so simple, but creates a real sense of validation.
exactly. And the best part is, it's applicable in all sorts of conversations.
Right.
From casual chats to high-stakes negotiations.
I'm going to try that. This is all incredibly valuable, but can we all really become super communicators? Or is it just a gift some people have?
Duhigg believes communication is a skill that can be learned and honed with practice.
Right.
We're not born with it. It's
Right.
something we can all improve.
That's encouraging. It means we have the power to improve our relationships, navigate conflicts more effectively, and create more meaningful connections.
Precisely. Duhigg's book gives us the tools. Now it's up to us to use them. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, but there's still more to explore.
All right, listeners, join us for part 3, where we'll take a closer look at how our personal histories and social identities impact our conversations and uncover strategies for fostering genuine connection, even when discussing challenging topics. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into super communicators. We've talked about recognizing different types of conversations and using techniques like looping,
Right.
but how do our own backgrounds and identities play into all of this?
That's a crucial point. Duhigg argues that our personal histories and those often invisible social identities we carry can have a huge impact, even on seemingly simple chats.
Like that aha moment the Dr. Rosenblum had when dealing with parents refusing vaccines for their kids.
Exactly. He kept hitting a wall until he realized those refusals were tied to the parents' social identities. Things like distrust of authority or feeling like they belong to a specific group with shared beliefs. Recognizing the who are we element was key.
So it's not about labeling people, but understanding that their identity is shaping their part of the conversation.
Right. And remember, we all have multiple identities.
Okay.
Duhigg points to that study with female math students struggling with stereotype threat, simply prompting them to think about their various identities, student, artist, friend, daughter, before a test, helped them perform better.
Because it reminded them they weren't just that one stereotype of female math student, which
Yeah.
can feel limiting.
Exactly. We're complex beings, and bringing that awareness into conversations helps. Duhigg then takes this further, arguing for the importance of creating a sense of equal footing in conversations.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's tough to truly connect when one person feels judged or talked down to. But how do you do that, especially with touchy subjects where people have strong, differing opinions?
Duhigg uses a fascinating example, a soccer league in post-ISIS Iraq. The city was deeply divided along religious lines, but they created a league where Muslim and Christian players were intentionally mixed on teams.
So not just playing alongside each other, but with shared responsibility, aiming for the same goal.
Yes, they focused on the shared goal of winning, which helped bridge those divides. That's applicable to our own conversations, too. Seek out common ground,
Right.
highlight shared goals, be mindful of those power dynamics that can sneak in.
Even with the best intentions, though, we might mess up.
Yeah.
Duhigg talks about super communicators being attuned to those moments when someone might feel threatened or excluded, right?
Right. And they also emphasize sharing their own vulnerabilities.
Uh-huh.
This isn't just about building trust, but modeling that it's okay to not have all the answers.
Which can take the pressure off, right? Like, it's a conversation, not a test where someone's right or wrong.
Exactly. It's about being authentic and open to learning from each other. You know, Duhigg's given us so many insights. From those 3 conversation types to looping, to understanding identity's role.
My brain is definitely full. But before we wrap up, what stood out to you as the most valuable takeaway from this whole deep dive?
You know, it's the idea that communication is a skill, not just a talent. It's something we can all get better at with practice and intention. And the payoff is huge. Stronger relationships, more productive collaborations, deeper connections in our lives.
Beautifully put. It's like Duhigg has given us a map to navigate this sometimes tricky terrain of human connection. And on that note, it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
What kind of conversation are you craving right now, listeners? Maybe it's time to put some of these insights into action.
And that's a wrap. Did your brain just get a workout?
We hope so. Subscribe to the Bookworm Duo for more mind-expanding book reviews. Don't forget to share the love and spread the word. Happy reading.